I was 36 years old when I learned that my father had been dead for 24 years. For most of my life, I thought he'd simply walked out on us. That's what my mother said the night he vanished. "Your father needed space," she whispered, holding me close while rain hammered the windows. "He'll come back when he's ready." He never did. And I believed her, because children always believe their mothers, even when the truth hides behind a trembling smile. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It breathes beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave, or foolish, enough to dig it up. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped through my apartment's mail slot without a return address. Heavy envelope, yellowed edges, my name written in blue ink I hadn't seen since childhood. Daniel Reed. Nobody had written my full name like that since my father disappeared. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father's, bold and deliberate, the kind that pressed through the page. "Danny," it began, "if you're reading this, something went wrong. Don't believe what they tell you. I didn't leave. Look for the truth in Box 17. Box 17. No explanation, no signature, just those words and a postmark from a small town 3 hours north. Mariner's Bluff, population 6,000. For a full minute, I couldn't breathe. The rational part of me wanted to laugh. A prank, I thought, some sick coincidence. But the ink was too real, the slant of the letters too familiar. I remembered watching him sign Christmas cards, his hand steady even after 3 cups of coffee. I read the note again and again until the letters blurred. My father had been gone for over 2 decades, gone as in missing, gone as in presumed alive but uncaring, but not gone as in dead. Not officially, not until now. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paper, trying to reconcile the impossible. My mother had died 2 years earlier. We'd buried her on a hillside above Portland, the priest speaking of peaceful reunions in another life. She'd never once hinted that my father was anything but alive, somewhere far away. That afternoon I called my aunt, my mother's younger sister, the only relative still in Oregon. "Aunt June," I said, my voice tight, "did my father ever write to you after he left?" There was silence on the other end, then a sigh, long and tired. "Why are you asking now, Danny?" "Because I got a letter." Her breath caught. "From him?" "Yes, at least, it looks like him. And it says something went wrong." For a few seconds, the only sound was static. Then she said quietly, "Come by the house tomorrow. There's something you need to see." I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, the letter spread out on the coffee table, the city outside blurred by rain. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the radiator, the ticking of the clock. Time stretched thin. I tried to remember the last day I saw my father, the smell of his cologne, the scratch of his beard when he kissed my forehead, the way his boots echoed on the porch as he left. He'd promised to bring me a baseball glove. I waited for weeks. When morning came, the city was drowned in fog. I drove north, headlights cutting through the mist, mind racing with questions I couldn't form into words. Aunt June lived in a weather-beaten house overlooking the Columbia River. She met me at the door before I could knock, eyes rimmed red as if she hadn't slept either. She didn't waste time on greetings. "You look just like him," she murmured, leading me to the living room. On the coffee table lay a stack of envelopes tied with a ribbon, brittle with age. "I found these after your mother passed," she said. "I wasn't sure what to do with them. She made me promise never to show you unless this day came." I untied the ribbon. Each envelope was addressed in my father's hand. Postmarks from the same tiny town, Mariner's Bluff. Dates ranged from 2001 to 2004. All stamped "Return to Sender." None had ever been opened. I slid out the first letter. "My dearest Ellen," it began, my mother's name. "I'm safe for now. They're watching me, but I'll find a way to fix this. Tell Danny I love him. Tell him I didn't run." The next one was almost identical, written months later. "I know you can't reply. I know they're reading everything, but hold on." Dozens of them, all variations of the same desperate plea. The handwriting grew shakier, the ink fading, the tone darker. The last letter, dated April 17th, 2004, ended abruptly mid-sentence. "If something happens to me, the truth is in." And then nothing. Just a smear of ink, as if the pen had been yanked away. My hands were trembling. I looked at June. "Did my mother ever get these?" She shook her head. "She burned every envelope that came from him, said he was dangerous, that we should forget he ever existed." Dangerous. That word didn't fit the man I remembered, the one who built tree houses and taught me to ride a bike. But as I looked at those letters, a cold realization crept in. If my father had been alive all that time, then my mother had lied to me every single day of my life. I asked where Mariner's Bluff was. June pointed at an old map pinned on the wall. "Fishing town. Your father's family used to have property there. Haven't been in years." Before I left, she handed me a small metal key attached to a faded tag labeled Box 17. "I found this in your mother's jewelry box," she said. "Figured it belonged with those letters." Box 17. The same words from my father's note. I drove straight to Mariner's Bluff that afternoon. The town looked frozen in another decade. Wooden storefronts, peeling paint, a diner that still had a payphone outside. I asked around about my father's name, but most people just shrugged, until an old man at the marina squinted at me and said, "Reed? You mean Johnny Reed? Worked the docks till the accident." "What accident?" I asked. He scratched his chin. "Storm of '04. Big one. 2 men went overboard. Only 1 body found." "Who?" He shook his head slowly. "Not your father." The air left my lungs. My father had died or vanished during a storm the same month his last letter was written. That night, I checked into the only motel in town, the kind with buzzing neon and salt stains on the carpet. I placed the key on the bedside table and stared at it for hours. If my father died in that storm, how did I just receive a letter from him now, postmarked last week? The rain started again, tapping against the window like impatient fingers. I could feel something shifting, something old and buried pushing to the surface. Tomorrow, I'd find Box 17, and whatever waited inside would either prove that my father was still alive, or finally tell me why everyone had worked so hard to keep him dead. The bank in Mariner's Bluff looked like a time capsule, hand-painted sign, brass handle worn smooth by 1,000 small-town errands, a bell that chimed when I pushed the door. Behind the counter, a woman in her late 50s lifted her reading glasses and studied my face the way people study old photographs, hunting for a resemblance. "You must be Daniel," she said quietly. "You have your father's eyes." Hearing it hit me somewhere I couldn't armor. "I'm here for a safe deposit," I said. "Box 17. She nodded, glanced at a ledger book instead of a screen, and came around the counter with a key on a ribbon. "He opened it in 2001, she murmured as if reciting a hymn. "Paid 10 years in advance. Then someone else kept it current." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Who?" I asked. Her mouth thinned. "We don't give out names, Mr. Reed. But it was always in cash. Envelopes. No notes." She led me down a short hallway into a vault room that smelled like paper and old rain. I placed my key in the left lock. She turned hers in the right, slid the narrow steel drawer free, and set it on the table. "Take your time," she said, and left me alone with 24 years of silence. Box 17 was heavier than it looked. Inside, things were arranged with the neatness of someone who knew chaos would come later. A cassette tape in a plastic sleeve labeled in permanent marker, "Danny, play with a pencil." A small brown envelope with my name on it. A folded map of the marina with a red X. A photo of my father in a Mariners Bluff Mariners baseball cap, squeezing someone's shoulder beneath a pier. A blue nylon lanyard threaded through a brass key stamped 7B, and a sealed letter addressed to Ellen, my mother, with a date, December 3rd, 2001, my 12th birthday. I don't know how long I just stared, the objects blurring at the edges like things underwater. When I finally moved, my hands felt too big for a job this delicate. I opened the brown envelope first. Inside was a thin strip of red cloth, the tail of a kite, and a Polaroid of me as a kid on the roof of our duplex in Portland, grinning with my arms out like wings while my father held the kite string and laughed up at me as if the sky belonged to us. On the back, his handwriting, "For the day I make it home with a new one. Happy 12th, pilot." I closed my eyes against the sudden ache of it. When I opened them, the world had that too bright clarity grief sometimes brings. I took out the cassette, turned it over in my hands, slid it into the old Walkman I'd bought on the way into town, and wound the spools with a pencil until the tape sat tight. When I pressed play, there was a hiss, then the harbor, gulls, the slap of water against pilings, that hollow echo of open space. Then his voice, closer than any dream. "Hey, Danny," he said, and the sound of my father saying my name after 2 decades made something inside me stand up and run and kneel all at once. "Happy birthday, kiddo. If you're hearing this, I didn't get to say it to your face. I'm sorry." He cleared his throat. A boat horn blew somewhere behind him. "I know what your mother told you. I know what she had to tell you. But I didn't leave you. I didn't run. Things got complicated. There's a storm tonight. They say not to go out on the water, but sometimes storms make hiding places noisy, and noisy makes truth easier to find." He laughed once without humor. "Listen, I'm not going to say names because I don't want to put anyone else in the crosshairs. But I made mistakes, stupid ones, with money a few years back when the fish dried up and the bills didn't. Your mother covered for me. She always covered for me. I was ashamed. I took night shifts at the docks to keep us afloat. And at the docks, I saw things I shouldn't have. And once you see, you can't unsee. Not if you want to look your kid in the eye." Wind fuzzed the mic. He kept talking. "I thought I could fix it without dragging you into it. I thought I could set it right and then come home with a red kite and a cake and we'd start over. But people who make money on secrets don't like lights turned on. They started following me, calling at night. Your mother got scared. She said the safest thing was to make you hate me. That way, if anything happened, you wouldn't go looking. Silence, then softer. I'm so sorry she had to carry that. I'm sorry you had to carry me. A long breath. If I don't make it back, I need you to know 2 things. 1. I loved you more than the ocean loves the moon. 2. The story they tell you won't be the truth, but it will be the story that keeps you breathing. Accept it for as long as you need to. When you're strong enough to want the rest, go to box 17. A scrape, maybe of his hand against wood. There's a map. There's a key, 7B. There's also a letter for your mother. If she's still alive when you hear this, give it to her. If she's gone, you read it. It's yours to carry then. He paused again. When he spoke, his voice had that stubborn brightness men put on when they don't want to scare the people they love. I'm going to try to move a few things off this pier before the weather gets real mean. There's a kid down here who reminds me of you. He says he doesn't need help. He does. The tape crackled. Footsteps, a door opening, a last hurried whisper. I didn't leave, Danny. Then the click of a button, and the long indifferent hiss of blank tape. I sat there with the Walkman on the table between my hands like something alive that might wake up if I breathed wrong. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hall and my own pulse in my ears. When the hiss reached its end and the tape stopped, I rewound it just to make sure I hadn't imagined any of it. His voice came again, older and smaller and exactly the same, and I had to press stop before the words dismantled me. I slid the cassette back into its sleeve and picked up the letter to my mother. The paper felt fragile in that way old truths do. I hesitated, then broke the seal. If she were alive, it would have been hers. But she was gone, and the questions she'd left me with had teeth. Ellen, it began, if you're reading this, I either couldn't talk you into telling him, or I'm not there to try. I don't blame you. I made this mess. You kept us alive in it. I'm writing from the pier because the storm is coming fast, and storms make me say things straight. Tell Danny I didn't leave because of him. Tell him he was the single good thing I ever made. If keeping him safe means he thinks I walked out, I can carry that. But promise me something. Don't let him grow up thinking love is a door that slams. There was more. Apologies wrapped in memories. A paragraph about the red kite string and the way I'd grinned when it pulled. A line that said, we make boys into men with answers when we can, and with lies when we must. Then at the bottom, a postscript that made my skin prickle. If Victor comes around asking questions, don't tell him anything. He's not what he says he is. I read that line 3 times. Victor. The man my mother married 2 years after my father vanished. The man who told me to lower my expectations. The man who never said my father's name. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope, my thumb tracing the postscript as if the ink might reveal new letters. Then I unfolded the marina map. The red X wasn't at the docking slips. It was behind them, at a row of locker sheds where fishermen stored nets and oilskins, and the 1,000 small tools working water requires. Next to the X, my father had written 7B. I picked up the brass key on the blue lanyard and weighed it in my palm. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like gravity. Before leaving the vault, I took out the photo from under the pier. My father's arm around a young man in an orange knit cap. The boy couldn't have been more than 17. His eyes were ringed with sleepless purple, his smile quick and defensive. On the back, in my father's handwriting, Eli, helping where nobody looks, December 3. I stood, slid the key and the photo into my pocket, and locked the box. When I brought the drawer back to the woman at the counter, she looked at me the way nurses look at people who know something bad but haven't felt it yet. "Did you get what you needed?" she asked. "I got what I deserved," I said, and the answer surprised us both. Outside, the sky was already turning that greenish-gray storms wear right before they decide where to split open. The wind pushed down the street in long, invisible hands. I drove to the marina with the window cracked and the cassette on the seat beside me like a passenger, the red kite tail peeking from the envelope like a reminder that some promises wait more patiently than others. Mariner's Bluff Harbor was a spine of weathered pilings and tin-roofed sheds hunched against the coming rain. A gull landed on a post and tipped its head at me as if I were late. I parked by the bait shop, followed the map around the chain-link fence, and found the locker row, numbers stenciled black on corrugated metal doors, padlocks like iron knots. 7B was near the end, half hidden by a coil of green rope and a faded "No Wake" sign. The padlock was old but oiled. The brass key slid in like it had been waiting for this exact minute. When I turned it, the lock popped with a click so clean it sounded like a new page tearing from a book. Inside the locker, the air was salt wet and cold. On the top shelf sat a beat-up tackle box with a strip of duct tape labeled "Tools" in my father's hand. On the bottom, a plastic storage bin with a cracked lid. I lifted the tackle box first, expecting rusted pliers and spare hooks. Instead, under a layer of neatly coiled line, there was a portable tape recorder, like the one we had when I was a kid. A second cassette, labeled E, If You'll Forgive Me, and a cheap disposable camera still in its cardboard sleeve. Next to them, a brown spiral notebook with the first page torn out and the second page titled Simple Truths. I opened the notebook. The first lines were dates and short ledger-like entries, each written like a man who wanted to anchor himself to facts. November 22. Spoke to Mike at Slip 9. Says Eli's been sleeping under the pier. Gave him my jacket. November 30. Heard Victor asking around the bait shop using a name that isn't his. Told them he was looking for me. Why? December 1st. Called Ellen from payphone. She cried. Said to stop leaving letters. Someone's reading our mail. December 3. Storm building. Told Eli not to go out. Says he won't. Don't believe him. At the bottom of the page, in a different pen, a single sentence. If I don't come back, it's because I went after a boy who thinks he doesn't need saving. My hands shook harder than I wanted to admit. I set the notebook down and reached for the plastic bin. Inside, wrapped in a flannel shirt I recognized from a long-ago camping trip, were two things: a metal tin of documents and an old wooden kite spool with a knot tied carefully at the end of the string, like the first stitch in something meant to last. I opened the tin with my fingernail. There were copies of Coast Guard incident reports, the kind stamped by an office printer and initialed by hands that didn't know us. Incident 04-12-03. 2 individuals reported overboard during storm event at 2219. 1 recovered, hypothermia, stabilized. 1 not recovered. Search suspended at 0240 due to conditions. Underneath lay a hospital discharge sheet with a name I recognized from the photo. Elijah Porter. 17. Treated for exposure and concussion. Released to aunt at 0315. Beside it, a Polaroid of the pier the next morning, gray and empty, a sodden coil of rope like punctuation at the edge. I stared at Eli's name until it blurred. The boy in the orange cap hadn't drowned. He'd lived. My father was the one the ocean kept. There was one more paper in the tin, folded small. I unfolded it carefully and found a receipt with a phone number scrawled across it in my mother's handwriting, along with a single sentence. Do not call from home. Use the payphone behind the diner. The line from my father's letter burned again. If Victor comes around asking questions, don't tell him anything. He's not what he says he is. I didn't want to imagine what that meant anymore. But the story was arranging itself whether I wanted it to or not. My mother had told me my father walked out. My father had risked his life to bring a kid home and hadn't made it back. Between those truths was a choice my mother had made: to bury him before the sea did, to raise me on the safety of anger instead of the danger of grief. And because grief has a long memory, it had finally found me anyway. I slid the cassette labeled E into the portable recorder, then stopped. Not here. Not with the water slapping at the pilings like a hand that remembers. I put it back in the tackle box, then took the disposable camera and the kite spool. I didn't know why I grabbed the spool. Maybe because some part of me still believed that if I held the string, the kite might find its way home. When I stepped out of the locker, the first fat drops of rain hit the dock and bloomed into dark coins on the wood. Far out beyond the breakwater, the ocean wore the beginning of a scowl. I locked 7B and slid the key back onto the lanyard. Out of habit, I checked over my shoulder. A man in a rain jacket stood under the bait shop awning, watching the water, or maybe watching me. When he lifted his head, there was a shadow of recognition I couldn't place, the kind that makes your stomach consider flight. I walked back to my car with the tape recorder under my jacket, the tackle box swinging at my side like a thing with its own heartbeat. By the time I closed the door, the rain had turned to a steady drum. I set the box on the passenger seat, the cassette on top, and turned the key in the ignition without starting the engine. The harbor lights smeared gold across the windshield. I had enough pieces now to build something. Maybe not a whole bridge, but the start of one. My father didn't leave. He died in a storm, trying to save a boy who lived. My mother hid that because fear had contour, and silence was easier to stack. And somewhere in that story, Victor's name sat like a nail in a tire, small and sharp, and catastrophic. I wiped the inside of the windshield with my sleeve and told the empty car. Okay, next. The payphone behind the diner was 3 blocks from the marina, tucked under a leaky awning between a rusted ice machine and a vending machine that sold nothing anyone wanted. I fed it quarters, dialed the number in my mother's handwriting, and listened to it ring. On the 4th ring, someone answered and said my name before I could speak. Daniel. The voice was older than the boy in the photo and younger than a man who'd learned to sleep. A beat, then, it's Eli. The rain intensified, blurring the world beyond the awning into watercolor. I pressed the receiver tight and felt the first, small, electric sensation of a knot starting to loosen. Can we talk? I asked. I've been waiting 20 years, he said. Meet me where he went in. The line went dead. I stood there with the dial tone in my ear, the quarters spent, the rain ticking on the metal roof like fingers drumming impatience. When I turned, the man under the bait shop awning was gone. I pocketed the crumpled receipt with the number and walked back into the storm toward the pier with the red X, the place where my father's last footsteps were probably washed clean twice a day. Somewhere beneath all that water was the version of him my mother needed me to forget. Somewhere above it was the version I needed to meet again. I tightened my grip on the kite spool as if the string might reach across years and pull something back to me. And for the first time since the letter slipped through my door, I felt something like momentum. The pier at night is a different country. Daylight forgives splinters and rust. Darkness counts them. By the time I reached the red X from my father's map, the rain had braided itself into sheets, driving sideways off the water, flattening the surface into hammered tin. A single sodium lamp buzzed above Slip 9, casting a cone of yellow that swayed when the wind leaned into it. He was already there, a lean figure in a black rain jacket, hood down, hair plastered to his scalp. When he turned, I recognized the eyes from the photo in my father's locker, bright and haunted, as if sleep had been something other people did. "Eli?" I said. He gave a small nod and stuck out his hand. His palm was colder than the air. "Elijah Porter," he said. "But everybody here calls me Eli. Except your father. He called me kid, like he was trying to make me younger than I was." "How old are you now?" I asked. 37, he said. "Same storm took me from 17 to 30 overnight. That's what water does. It ages you where nobody can see." We stood for a moment in the slap of rain and the creaking chorus of lines against cleats. He glanced at the tackle box under my arm and the blue lanyard around my wrist. "You found the locker," he said. "Good. He wanted you to." I swallowed. "I found more than that." "Yeah," he said softly. "You found him." We moved under the eave of a gear shed where the rain softened to a hiss. He leaned his back against corrugated metal and looked past me, out to where the breakwater chopped the horizon into teeth. When he spoke, his voice had the steady rhythm of someone who had told himself this story 1,000 times to keep from drowning in it. "I was sleeping under there," he said, tipping his chin toward the black ribs of the pier. "Underneath. Winter wind comes through those planks like a sermon." I'd stuffed newspaper into my jacket and wrapped my feet in grocery bags. "That buys you maybe an hour." A wry smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I thought I didn't need help. I thought needing help was how you got marked." "How'd you end up there?" I asked. "Same way most kids do," he said. "Stepfather with bad hands. Mother who apologized for bruises she didn't cause. A trash bag with my clothes in it and a bus ticket somebody swore would take me to my father in Coos Bay." Turns out, fathers are like weather reports. You only know if they're true once you're standing in it. He rubbed his thumb absently along a crease in his palm, then shook his head like he was returning to the script fate had assigned him. "The dock men knew me. Some saw me, most didn't. Your father did. First time he handed me coffee, I told him I didn't take charity. He said, 'Good, I don't give it. I make trades.' So he gave me coffee and told me to watch his gear while he took a call. Trade. Next time he gave me a sandwich and told me to tell him if I saw a white van circle twice without stopping. Trade." "White van," I said. "Harbor Span?" The name tasted like rust. "Not Harbor Span," he said. "Not officially. Victor's crew." The name hit like a hook snagging something beneath my ribs. "Victor," I repeated as if saying it could make it smaller. "My stepfather." He nodded, rain tapping his eyelashes. He came around a month before the storm. Nobody knew him, and everybody did. That kind of man. He talked like a foreman, dressed like a lawyer, paid like a priest for silence. Asked questions with answers in them. He called your father John like they were equals. They weren't. What did he want? My voice came out thinner than I liked. Control, Eli said simply. There were shipments that didn't match the manifests. Crates that got counted twice or not at all. Your dad started noticing. Started writing numbers in a little notebook and taking pictures with one of those disposable cameras that make a sound like a toy when you wind them. His gaze flicked to the cardboard sleeve peeking from my box. He was brave. Brave in the way that makes men dead. Lightning stitched a ragged seam out beyond the harbor mouth. Thunder rolled across the water like a heavy thing being dragged. The night of the storm, Eli continued. The wind turned at dusk and the boats complained like they knew. Your dad told me to get out from under and sleep in the locker. 7B. He left it open. He said, "I'll be back with a kite for a kid who thinks he's a man. He always talked about you." Eli's mouth curled. You were the proof he kept in his pocket. My throat closed. I pressed my fingers to the wooden kite spool as if that could steady me. What happened? I asked. After he left you there. I didn't stay, Eli said, and shame briefly darkened his eyes. 17-year-olds don't keep rules, especially when the rules are good for them. I crept out to watch the water. A skiff had broken her lines, rocking hard against the pilings. Your father went after her because that's what he did. He didn't like seeing things that could be fixed left broken. Eli's jaw shifted. I followed, because that's what stupid kids do when they think bravery looks the same on everyone. He pressed his palms together like he was warming them, though the cold was no longer the problem. We got her mostly secured. He was looping the last line when headlights hit the pier from the road above. Boat idling. Men got out. Not dock men, shoes too clean. They moved like the weather was something that happened to other people. One of them shouted a name I didn't know. Your dad froze for half a breath. Then he said, without turning his head, "Kid, go." "Victor," I said. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not." The wind was loud and the rain was committing to its performance. One of the men carried a crate and set it down near the pilings like it was too precious to get wet. Your dad stepped between them and the boat. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He just stood where a decent man belonged and said, "Not tonight." The man nearest him laughed. Another man didn't. He took one step too close and your father hit him with the kind of calm that ends arguments. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the scene was still playing there. Everything happened fast. Somebody grabbed me. Your father saw. He moved the way men move when they don't plan to see morning. He knocked me free and planted me against the rail like I was something worth saving. Then the skiff jerked, a cleat tore out, the line snapped, and the whole world dropped sideways. I remember two things, his hand on my shoulder and his voice in my ear. "Breathe slow," he said. "Don't fight the cold. Water remembers." It remembered me then. The taste of diesel, the slam of it against my face, the instant when the sky and the ocean traded places. Eli's breath went shallow and quick, matching a storm 2 decades gone. I wanted to put a hand on his arm and didn't. Some memories you leave alone while they pass. When I came up, he said, I saw the men on the pier pointing, saw a flashlight carve a white blade through the rain. I saw your father go under, come up, push me toward a rope and then go under again. He didn't surface that last time. He stared at the slick wood at our feet as if the knot that had failed might still be there. I woke up on the dock with a blanket around me and a Coast Guard jacket on my chest. Somebody was shouting at me to stay awake. Your father's name was in my mouth like a prayer I didn't know the words to finish. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until my chest hurt. They didn't find him, I said, though the report in the tin had already told me so. No, he said. Only me. I wanted it to be the other way around for a long time. Then I learned to want what he wanted. That I live and build something he'd recognize as a life. We let the rain speak for a while. Somewhere a halyard slapped a mast in a steady, irritated rhythm. I thought of my mother alone in our old kitchen, the ring of the wall phone like an alarm nobody answered. I thought of letters burned and a boy my father had saved at the price of everything else. My mother, I said finally. Why did she keep it from me? Why the lie about him leaving? Eli's eyes softened. Because grief with a target will go looking for a fight, he said. Grief without one just eats you from the inside. She chose the kind that kept you moving. And because Victor came around asking questions, no widowed woman should have to answer. What did he ask? My hands were fists, and I uncurled them one finger at a time. If she'd heard from John, he said. If John had said anything about manifests. If she knew anything about the boy on the pier. If she had keys. Eli squinted at the rain the way fishermen read weather. He came with a badge made of confidence. He said he worked compliance for HarborSpan. Men like that don't work for companies. Companies work for them. Did you ever see him again? I asked. Once, Eli said. At the hospital that night. He stood outside my curtain and argued with the doctor about transferring me before the Coast Guard could ask questions. The doctor told him to get out in a voice that made even Victor remember where he was. He smiled when he left. Men like that have 2 smiles, the one they show you and the one they practice in the mirror. The wind shifted, driving the rain under the eave, forcing us tight to the wall. Eli tipped his head at the tackle box. He left you something else, didn't he? A tape. For me. I took out the portable recorder and the cassette labeled E, if you'll forgive me. I didn't listen, I said. Felt wrong without you. He took it like it might burn him. He saved my life, he said. That's a debt that doesn't have a ledger. It just sits there until you find some way to give interest. He slipped the tape in, pressed play, and we both leaned in to catch the small voice we'd crossed years to hear. Eli, my father said, and the way he said the name made the hair rise on my arms. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't do the math right. A soft laugh. That happens with storms. He let a breath go. You don't owe me anything. I need you to start there. Boys who get saved sometimes think they have to live 2 lives to make it fair, their own and the one the dead would have had. Don't. Live one life well. Eat hot food. Get a place with a door that locks and a window that opens. Learn a trade that uses your hands and your head. When you're ready, find Danny. Tell him I didn't leave." His voice shifted, the way fathers use a tone that builds a roof over a kid's head. "There's a man asking questions who isn't what he says he is. He'll call himself Victor. He'll use words like policy and procedure to make theft sound like tidying up. Stay away from him. If he presses, tell him you don't remember. Your memory is not a public utility. It belongs to you." Eli let out a noise that might have been a laugh or a sob. I couldn't tell which, and it didn't matter. "One more thing," my father said. "I made some mistakes with money when I was young. I tried to fix them by outworking them. That's not how math or shame works. If anyone comes to you with offers that sound like rescue but smell like debt, say no. And if you ever feel the ocean tugging at your ankles when you're not standing near it, go sit with someone who will make you tea and say your name until you come back into your body." The tape hissed a long moment. Then he added almost shyly, "There's an envelope with a key in the locker. Apartment 2D, the old cannery building. It's nothing much, but it's dry. If you want it, it's yours. If you don't, give it to a kid who thinks he doesn't need help. That'll make us even." Click. Silence. Eli set the recorder against his chest and closed his eyes as if warmth might seep from the plastic. When he opened them, they shone. "He gave me that place," he said. "I slept there for 2 years. Learned how to hold a wrench without stripping the bolt. I thought I'd tell you someday. I thought someday would be later. It tends to be now." We stood with the little machine humming in our hands and the storm applauding itself all around us. Something unspooled inside me, a knot I hadn't known was there, loosening. Not gone, not ever gone, but looser. "I need to know what Victor is," I said, "not just who." Eli's mouth went flat. "Victor handles the kinds of shipments that need more paperwork than paper," he said. "Harbor Span's a name you can put on a truck. Victor is the name you put on a favor. He runs compliance like a man who writes the rules on water and sells them to anyone who pretends to read." "Can he be touched?" I asked. "By what?" Eli said. "Law, maybe, if law remembers where it came from. By attention? Definitely. Men like Victor don't mind being seen at podiums. They hate being seen at docks." A gust shoved the shed hard enough to make the wall behind us thrum. He pushed off the corrugated steel and straightened. "Come on," he said. "There's one more thing you need to see before the harbor eats our footprints." He led me along the slick boards to the end of the pier where a plaque sat bolted to the rail, black with rain, stamped with names and dates. I'd walked past a dozen like it in coastal towns and never stopped. Eli wiped water from it with his sleeve until the letters caught the soda-colored light. "Jonathan Reed," it said. "Husband, father, mariner. Lost to the sea, December 3rd, 2004. Loved beyond the horizon." My breath left me in a single sound. Beneath it, someone had scratched a line so faint it might have been wind, except for the careful shape of it. "He didn't leave." "I did that," Eli said. "Day after I got out of the hospital. I was angry that they put lost. I wanted to put kept. But that sounded like the ocean did a kindness. It didn't. It just did what it does. People do kindness." He touched the scratched words and made his hand a fist. "Your mother came here once a year at dawn, wore a yellow coat, stood where you're standing, and didn't cry like people in movies. She just held the rail like it was the only honest thing left. A fresh roll of thunder stitched the sky to the water. He turned to face me squarely. If you go after Victor, go with more than anger. Go with receipts. He'll make your rage into a story about a son who can't accept a father's flaws. Don't give him that story. What do I need? I asked. Manifests, he said. Payroll records. Surveillance from the hospital that night. Nurses remember. Doc cameras forget when they're told to. Find the places that didn't forget. Your father kept copies. Men like him always do. He hid them where he hid everything that mattered, where the weather can't get it. He tipped his head at the dark bulk of the cannery building along the harbor road. Concrete. Second floor. Apartment 2D. I held up the lanyard. The key? He smiled without showing teeth. You're the only one who ever had a key, he said. You just didn't know it. Behind us, tires hissed on wet asphalt. Headlights swept the pier, bright and brief. A black SUV rolled past the bait shop and slowed. The window lowered an inch. Even from here, I could feel the temperature of that glance. A man measuring distances and prices. Go, Eli said low. Don't lead him where you're going. Walk the long way. Make him think you'll sleep. What about you? I asked. He tugged his hood up, becoming a smaller shape against the weather. I've been disappearing since I was 12, he said. Practice makes something like perfect. I left him at the plaque and walked toward the road like I was done for the night, like I was the kind of man who forgets to lock doors in small towns. The SUV idled, then eased away. I waited in the shadow of a stack of crab pots until its taillights were swallowed by drizzle. Then I cut behind the sheds, across a gravel strip, and into the black stairwell of the cannery building, where the air smelled of old sugar and salt, and the faint, warm ghost of people who had cooked fish here generations ago. On the second floor, the hallway was lit by a single bulb the color of nicotine. Apartment 2D's door had a scratch under the knob, like somebody had tried it once with a key that wasn't theirs. My key slid in like a memory finally given permission to surface. The lock turned with the soft, forgiving clack of a thing maintained out of love rather than fear. Inside, the apartment was exactly what my father had promised Eli. Dry. A couch with a blanket folded with military precision. A hot plate. A sink that dripped in a tempo you could live with. On the table, a neat stack of rent receipts signed cash. And beneath them, a shoebox. I lifted the lid like you lift a sleeping child. Photographs. Manifests. A copy of a harbor-span compliance itinerary with Victor's name typed in a font that tried to make him sound legitimate. A printout of a hospital log showing an attempted unauthorized transfer order at 0212, signature line blank where a doctor should have been. And at the bottom, an envelope with my name written in my father's hand. I sat in that small, good room, rain making tiny percussion on the window, and slid my thumb under the flap. Danny, it began. If you found your way here, it means you learned the hard part and kept walking. That's all being a man ever was in my book. In the shoebox are the pieces you'll need if you want to make a liar explain himself to a room with chairs and laws. If you don't want that, take the pictures down to the water and let the salt have them. Both choices are honest. One is heavier to carry. I put the letter down and stared at the pile of truth my father had left like a flare. Lightning flickered behind the curtain. In it, I saw my mother at the rail in a yellow coat. I saw Eli at 17 and 37. I saw Victor's smile like a crack in glass. I gathered the papers, made a list in my head the way I do when a bridge says it's tired and I argue it back into service. Hospital, harbor span, bank ledgers, dock cameras. Aunt June. The bank manager. The bank manager who remembered things the computers had forgotten. On the table, in a chipped mug with a marlin painted on it, stood a handful of pencils sharpened to soldier points. I picked one up and wrote what my life had just become. Find the rest of my father. Then I underlined it twice. Outside, a car door closed. The sound was polite and wrong. I crossed to the window without moving the curtain and watched a dark shape step from a dark vehicle and look up at the building the way men look up at mountains they plan to mine. Victor had always been good with timing, but he was late to this party. I let the curtain fall back into place and exhaled slowly until my hands remembered not to shake. Tomorrow, I would stop being the son who waited and start being the man who asked. And I would do it with more than anger. Morning in apartment 2D began with the sound of rain gutters clearing their throat. I woke on the couch with my father's letter on my chest and a list in my head. Bridges are just decisions made in steel. Investigations are the same in paper. I made coffee on the hot plate, spread everything from the shoebox across the table, and started turning grief into work. First, preserve. I photographed every page, manifests, the hospital log with 0212 attempted transfer, the harbor span itinerary with Victor's name, the Polaroids. I made duplicates of the cassettes onto my phone by playing them into the microphone, then burned backups to a cheap USB drive I found in the drawer. I labeled each file like I labeled bridge members before a load test, with dates and a promise to come back. Second, map. I drew lines. Hospital, harbor span office, the bank, the marina bait shop, Aunt June. The woman at the vault who kept ledgers in ink. Every line led to a name, and every name led to a door. I wrote the same sentence across the bottom of the notebook my father had started. Find the rest of my father. The hallway smelled like wet rope when I left. I locked 2D, counted to 10, unlocked it, took the USB from under the coffee maker and slid it into my pocket. Victor hadn't earned my trust. Paranoia had. The hospital sat inland on a hill, a square of brick and glass that had been added to in cautious decades. At the front desk I asked for records. The volunteer smiled like courage was contagious and pointed me downstairs. The records office was a fluorescent aquarium with 2 desks and a plant trying to live under the wrong sun. A woman with silver hair and a laminated badge that said P. Chen looked up, and in that small pivot of attention I recognized competence. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I hope so," I said. "I'm trying to view a log from December 3rd, 2004. Night shift, ER. I have a copy of one line, and I'm looking for the rest." I slid her a photo of the page, 0212 attempted unauthorized transfer order, and watched her eyes register the date before the words. People remember storms better than years. "Why?" she asked, not unkindly. "My father drowned that night," I said. "Another kid lived. Somebody tried to move him before the Coast Guard finished their questions. I'm trying to understand who." Her gaze softened around the edges. "I was there," she said. "Same rain as today, only meaner. We had 2 heart attacks, 3 hypothermia cases, and 1 stubborn boy who kept trying to get up and go back to the water." She tapped the photo. "Dr. Ruiz wrote that note. The person who tried to push the transfer wasn't staff. He wore authority like a coat that fits someone else first. Said he was compliance. Said we'd regret it if we didn't cooperate." "Did he give a name?" "He gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes," she said. But we have visitor logs. She stood, disappeared into a back room, and returned with a thin binder that had survived more than one office move. Her finger walked through names. Here, she said. 0206. V. Hale. No affiliation listed. Neat printing. People write differently when they're lying. I took a photo of the entry and felt the first clean click of evidence finding evidence. Is there camera footage? I asked. She tilted her head, assessing what I could carry. Not from ER, she said. Old system failed that winter and the tapes got reused. But security keeps exterior feeds longer. Liability makes memory extend. If you want it, you'll need a request signed by someone who still knows me. Go upstairs. Ask for Ruiz. Tell him Patricia sent you. Dr. Ruiz looked like a man who had wrestled sleep and won just enough to function since 1997. He scanned the letter from my father, the photo of Eli's discharge sheet, and the visitor log, and let out a breath that sounded like it had waited 20 years to leave. I remember the boy, he said. Temper like a stray, hunger like a wound. And I remember the man with the perfect tie who wanted to take him away before we'd warmed him. I told him if he touched my patient again, I'd have him removed. He smiled and said he'd make a note. I told him where to put it. A thin, tired smile. Security was better then. We still kept tapes when somebody made me mad. An hour later, I was in a basement office with a security supervisor who had a long memory and a drawer full of old drives labeled 2004-12. He found the exterior camera pointing at the ER doors and scrubbed to 0206. We watched a black sedan nose into the ambulance bay, watched a man step out with a coat that repelled rain like a lie repels accountability. He signed a clipboard, looked straight into the camera without seeing it, and went inside. The supervisor paused, printed a still, and slid it across the desk. Can I get a copy of the full clip? I asked. You can, if you bring me a hard drive, he said, and a decent cinnamon roll. The cafeterias have opinions about sugar I don't share. Done, I said. I shook his hand, like he'd just told me the river's true depth. Back at the marina, the bait shop smelled like salt, diesel, and anise from the black licorice the owner had stashed under the register. He wore a cap that had seen more sunrises than I had. His name tag said Ben in letters that were young when the hat was. You John's boy, he said before I spoke. He squinted past me at the water like if he focused hard enough he might pull a silhouette out of it. You walk like him. Got the same I'll fix it in your shoulders. I'm trying, I said. I need two things. Doc camera footage from the night of the storm and a name to go with a black SUV that liked this place too much. He scratched his cheek. Camera at the fish co-op, he said. Analog. Jeff in the back keeps everything because he's scared the future won't. Go ask. As for the SUV, it had a habit of parking where my customers didn't. I asked the driver to move once and he told me he'd buy my lease when it came up. People say things they think make them big. He sniffed. Plates were Oregon, Vanity, VH, like he wanted an initial to be a crown. The fish co-op was a concrete block with doors big enough to invite whales in if they consented to plastic aprons. Jeff had a beard that suggested both patience and poor barber access. When I explained, he said what men say when they are deciding to trust you. Huh, and went into a room where time had piled itself into stacks of tapes and stickers. This the night? He asked, holding up a cassette labeled 120304 with the word storm underlined. I don't have a deck anymore, but we digitized a bunch of the old stuff before the VCR died. Might be on the server that the city swears they'll help us replace. He clicked, typed, and turned the monitor so I could see. At 2207, a white van pulled up near the pier access road. At 2212, headlights swept across the boardwalk. At 2219, The frame shook as wind shouldered the camera. Figures appeared. 2 men in coats, one carrying a crate. Then a scuffle, a line whipping like a serpent, and chaos written in rain. It wasn't a confession. Storms don't write those. But it was context. It was truth in motion. Jeff burned me a copy while telling me about his granddaughter's disdain for fish, then handed it over like it was fragile. Because it was. By noon I had hospital logs, a still of Victor's face, a security clip, co-op footage, and a stack of notes that made anger unnecessary. Anger blurs. Paper clarifies. I called Aunt June from the payphone. He came to the hospital, I said. Signed The Hale. Then he tried to move Eli. Security and a doctor stopped him. June's breath hitched. Your mother hated that man, she said. She never said his name when you were around, but she kept a can of mace by the door the year she married him. Why'd she marry him? I asked. Protection that looked like protection, June said. And because grief makes bad bargains and calls them plans. I thanked her and hung up. The payphone swallowed the dial tone with a clack. A car door thumped soft behind me. I turned and found Victor standing 5 yards away in a gray coat that had decided to hate the weather on principle. He smiled like a solution. Daniel, he said, as if my name belonged to him. You've been busy. I put both hands in my pockets to keep them from acting out the history of men and their jaws. It's been a crowded morning, I said. Lots of people remembered things you preferred they forgot. He tilted his head. You're upset, he said. Understandable. Grief makes curious investigators. Let's not let it make enemies out of family. Family is down by the water on a plaque, I said. You're an asterisk. His eyes tightened by a degree, then smoothed. Walk with me, he said. We'll get coffee. Mariner's Bluff thrives on gossip. Let's give them a story about reconciliation. Let's give them a story about truth, I said, but I walked. Because there are tables you choose and tables you inherit. And this one had been waiting 20 years. We went to the diner with the crooked O in the neon sign. He took the corner booth back to the wall, gaze on the door. I set my phone face down with the recorder running under my napkin. He ordered black coffee and smiled at the waitress with the efficient warmth of a man who has calculated the tip before the kindness. I loved your mother, he said once the cups landed. She was alone. I made sure she wasn't. You made sure she wasn't truthful, I said. There's a difference. He sipped as if he were tasting for notes of insolence. John was reckless, he said. He put you both in danger with his curiosity. He liked to pretend he was a policeman with a camera. Men who work docks should learn to keep their eyes on their coils. He died saving a kid you tried to remove from a hospital before the Coast Guard finished asking questions, I said. There's tape. There's a log. There's a still of you at 0206 looking at a camera like it was a mirror you planned to own. He didn't flinch. Men like Victor practice life at mirrors. Storms are messy, he said. They make logs read like poetry, and tapes look like myths. You're an engineer, Daniel. You know you can make data say what you need if you choose the right axis. I'm offering you a different axis. Closure. He slid a white envelope across the table. Inside were papers written by a lawyer who had looked at sorrow and seen opportunity. A non-disclosure, a settlement. A clause about no fault and mutual respect for the complexities of maritime operations. There was also a check with more zeros than my rent. Take the money, he said. Replace the anger you inherited with something that spends. Your father made errors of judgment. You don't have to make errors of character following him. I let the envelope sit between us like a dead thing. You had a white van at 2207, I said. You had crates that didn't match manifests. You had a boy you didn't want asked questions in a room with a Coast Guard badge. And you have a habit of writing your initials on the world and calling it order. I'm not selling my father for grocery money. His mouth made a quarter smile. You think this is grocery money? He asked, amused. You have no idea what groceries cost. I leaned in. I know what it costs to bury someone twice, I said. Once in water, once in lies. There are moments when men decide which version of themselves you deserve. Victor let the mask slip enough for me to see the geometry of the one beneath. John Reed interfered with operations he didn't understand, he said, voice lower. We covered the storm the way policy requires. He glanced at the envelope. You can be covered too. It was a sentence with edges. It cut even as it offered a bandage. My phone recorded it faithfully, indifferent to threat and tone. I pushed the envelope back. I brought receipts to the hospital, I said. I'll bring them to the co-op, to the state, to anyone who remembers what laws were for before men like you taught them new tricks. He smiled again, slow as a fuse. You're your father's son, he said. He liked to think rules were a community project. The century cured most men of that. It didn't cure him. We sat in the tight silence that follows an exchange of true positions. He finished his coffee and set down the cup with the precision of a man who stages scenes for effect. This is your only gentle offer, he said. After this, it's concrete. Concrete remembers what falls into it. Good, I said. So does water. He stood, placed cash on the table, and looked down at me as if gravity had taken my side. You have my number, he said. Use it if you grow up. I watched him walk to his SUV and drive away, the diner bell making the smallest protest as the door shut. When the room remembered itself, the waitress poured me more coffee and said, He always tips 20%. People like that think math is morality. I left the envelope on the table. Outside, the rain had stopped deciding and started committing. I walked back to 2D by the long route, watching glass for reflections that didn't belong to me. In the apartment, I transferred the diner recording to 2 places, then 3, and sent one to an email address I hadn't used in a decade. Belt, suspenders, rope. At dusk, Eli knocked twice and let himself in the way men do when they've been told they're welcome but still don't believe it. He sat at the table, listened to the recording, and shook his head with the weary admiration people sometimes have for wolves. He said, Covered the storm the way policy requires, Eli said. That's a confession in compliance dialect. It's leverage, I said. Enough to make honest people brave and dishonest people sloppy. He slid a folded paper across. From Ben, he said. Plates from that SUV. A friend in town hall likes him enough to ignore a favor. Plates are corporate registered. Shell company tied to an address in Portland that used to be a harbor span satellite. They shut it last year. Victor kept the mail key. We stacked what we had. It was enough to start moving the world an inch. Tomorrow, I said, we go to the bank. The woman there keeps ledgers. She remembered a someone who paid the box for 10 years in cash. We find the entries. We find who had a habit of perfumed envelopes and an expensive pen. Eli nodded. And the co-op? I have the footage, I said. We'll make copies that can't be argued with. Then we give a copy to someone who doesn't owe us anything but owes the truth, everything. We worked until the coffee gave up and the pencils got short. Before he left, Eli paused at the door, hand on the frame like he was testing whether the house would hold. He didn't leave, he said. Not to me, but to the room, to the rain, to the kid he'd been. He just ran out of body. After he was gone, I stood at the window and watched the harbor braid itself into night. In the glass, my face carried the weight of men who had promised kites and delivered warnings. I didn't feel brave. I felt organized. Sometimes that's enough. I slid my father's cassette back into the Walkman and didn't press play. I knew what he'd say. Breathe slow. Don't fight the cold. Keep your hands on the rope even when the knot gives. Tomorrow I'd go to the bank and lay my palm on the ledger like a man taking an oath. I'd take the co-op footage to a reporter who still wrote like facts were oxygen. I'd call Dr. Ruiz and ask whether he had any paper left in him for an affidavit. I'd visit the HarborSpan office in Portland and ask to see their compliance manual, then watch their faces when I pronounced the word manual like scripture. And I'd call Victor, not to accept his money, to set a meeting with a room that had chairs and a microphone that belonged to someone else. Because grief had had 20 years. It was time for math. By the next morning, I'd learned that exhaustion and clarity can live in the same skin. I left apartment 2D at dawn, when the harbor fog was still deciding whether to rise or stay. The air smelled like metal and wet wood. In my jacket pocket were 2 flash drives, a still photo of Victor's face, and a copy of the visitor log from the hospital. The plan was simple, which meant it wouldn't stay that way. The bank opened at 8. The woman from before, the one with the steady eyes and the ledger book, recognized me as soon as I walked in. Box 17, she said quietly, as if the words themselves were a password to something older than both of us. I need to know who's been paying for it since 2011, I said. You said someone kept it current. She hesitated only a second before nodding toward the back. Come with me. In the archive room, she set down a worn brown ledger the size of a phone book. We keep digital records now, she said, but cash makes people superstitious. They like to see their handwriting in history. Her fingers turned pages with the precision of someone who still believes in paper. There, she said, tapping a line. February 2nd, 2011. Annual renewal. Amount paid in cash. She squinted at the signature. V. Hale. I felt the temperature in the room drop, though nothing moved. He used his real name? People like him think that's camouflage, she said. Nobody suspects arrogance. I took a photo of the page and another of the next entry. Same signature, same hand. Once every year, sometimes twice. Every payment sealed with a red pen checkmark and her initials in the margin. Why keep paying? I asked quietly. She looked at me as if testing whether I was ready for the answer. Because closing the box would have meant admitting what was in it mattered. I thanked her and left. Outside, the fog had burned away and the day had turned sharp and blue, the kind of morning that makes liars squint. At the diner, Ben handed me a folded newspaper that smelled of ink and fried eggs. Front page, he said, tapping it with a coffee-stained finger. Don't thank me. Thank my niece. She writes for the Bluff Gazette. The headline read, Mariner's Bluff Doctor Speaks Out on 2004 Storm Cover-Up. Below it, a grainy still from the hospital security footage, Victor in his perfect tie, frozen mid-stride under the awning. The although article quoted Dr. Ruiz. An unauthorized individual attempted to remove a minor from our care during the night of December 3, 2004. Records were later altered. I'm speaking now because silence is also a kind of crime. The story spread fast. Small towns run on rumor, but truth with pictures moves like gasoline. Within hours, HarborSpan released a statement calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding tied to a legacy employee. The state's attorney's office promised a review, and my phone, which had been silent for years, began to ring. First was a local reporter named Miller from the Oregonian. "We're building a follow-up," he said. "Is it true you're the son of Jonathan Reed?" "Yes." "Would you go on record?" "No," I said. "Not yet. But I'll give you what my father left me. Documents, manifests, photographs." He exhaled through his teeth. "That's more than we usually get. Where do we meet?" "Somewhere the ocean can hear us," I said, and gave him the marina address. Before noon, my name was trending in corners of the internet that confused tragedy with entertainment. Strangers messaged me about heroism and closure. Some called my father a whistleblower, others called him reckless. The noise rose, but the facts stayed still. Anchors that refused to move. At 2 p.m. I got a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Neutral ground. 4 p.m. V." I didn't answer, but I knew what neutral meant in Victor's vocabulary. A place with walls. Still, confrontation is sometimes a bridge you have to walk even when you see the cracks. The neutral ground turned out to be the conference room of the closed HarborSpan office in Portland. I arrived early enough to see his SUV parked out front, early enough to photograph the building's address sign half unbolted from the wall. Inside, dust motes drifted like the last quiet witnesses. He was waiting at the long table, jacket off, sleeves rolled. The performance of a man doing damage control rather than confession. "You've been busy," he said. "You should try it sometime," I said. "It keeps the lies from sticking." He smiled that thin, administrative smile. "You've made a lot of noise for a small-town engineer. Reporters, doctors, ledgers. Careless, Daniel. You don't understand what happens when machines bigger than you start turning." "I understand load limits," I said. "When a structure's under too much pressure, it either collapses or reveals who built it wrong." He ignored that. "Your father's death was a tragedy," he said. "It doesn't need to be a scandal. You've already gotten attention, sympathy, maybe even money if you play it right. Take it. Don't become the story." "Too late," I said. "You made me the story 20 years ago when you signed his death in a ledger." He leaned forward, voice soft. "You think you can prove anything? Hospital logs, fishermen, a ledger? These are whispers. You have one recording, one doctor. We have institutions. When this is over, you'll be a grief-stricken son chasing ghosts. That's the narrative. That's how we win." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I'm just the man with the receipts." I set my phone on the table, screen dark, recording app running. "We're both engineers in our own way," I said. "You build systems of silence. I build bridges. Let's see which lasts longer." He laughed, but it was brittle. "You're your father's son. Idealism is a disease in your bloodline. That's the best inheritance I could have asked for, I said. He reached into his folder and slid another envelope across the table. Last offer, he said. Sign this. Non-disclosure. You'll get $300,000 wired to whatever account you like. It's more than he ever earned fishing lies out of the water. I looked at the envelope, then at him. You should stop using numbers as apologies, I said. They sound smaller every time. He stood smoothing his shirt cuffs. You've made powerful people nervous. Nervous people clean up. Be careful where you sleep. I don't sleep, I said. Not since the tape. He stopped at the door. You have until Monday. After that, this conversation didn't happen. When he was gone, I opened the envelope. Inside were the same papers as before, plus a flash drive. I pocketed it without looking. Even poison has uses, if you know its weight. Outside, the street felt different, thinner somehow, as if the buildings were listening. I drove back to the harbor with my window down, letting wind and salt and exhaust braid together into something like focus. At apartment 2D, Eli was waiting on the couch with the Oregonian reporter, Miller. He'd already poured coffee. He's clean, Eli said. Knows how to keep notes. Miller had the look of someone who'd been told too many times that truth doesn't sell. We're running part 2 tomorrow, he said. But I need your voice in it. You don't have to go on camera. Just context. Something human. Human, I said. That's expensive these days. Free copy of the paper, he offered. Eli grinned. Do it. He won't get the tone right otherwise. I told Miller everything except the details that would get people hurt before they were ready. Ruiz, the bank woman, Jeff at the co-op. I gave him the ledgers, the photo of Victor's signature, the still from the hospital camera, the copy of the co-op tape. Run the headline clean, I said. No adjectives, just facts. He nodded. You sound like my editor. After he left, the apartment felt smaller. Eli turned on the radio, static blending with rain. You know he won't let this go quietly, he said. Men like Victor don't lose. They retreat and rename. That's fine, I said. Names leave trails. That night, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. A voice message, 5 seconds long. I played it twice before it made sense. My mother's voice, soft and tired. Danny, if he ever calls himself Victor, run. It ended with a click. The sound of a tape recorder button, not a phone. I sat down slowly. My mother had been dead 2 years. The message had been left last night. Eli looked up. What is it? Proof, I said quietly, that the past still has teeth. The next morning, the Gazette headline screamed louder. State to investigate harbor span operations. The subhead, Whistleblower's Family Speaks. Below it, my father's picture, smiling in the wind, holding the red kite. The article quoted me. He didn't leave. He was erased. By noon, a state investigator named Alvarez called. We're assembling a case, she said. We need your documentation. We also need you to stay where you are. There's chatter about someone trying to move evidence. Victor? Or someone he answers to, she said. Either way, we're coming tonight. At 3 p.m., someone knocked on the door. Too early for law, too polite for trouble. Eli opened it halfway and froze. Victor stood there holding a grocery bag and a smile. Peace offering, he said. No hard feelings. Eli's voice was low. Daniel. I nodded. Let him in. Victor stepped inside, set the bag on the counter, pulled out a bottle of wine. For your father, he said. He'd have liked a toast. Funny, I said. He liked truth better. His smile didn't move. I underestimated you, he said. You remind me of him, same stubborn decency. Dangerous trait. Dangerous to who? I asked. To anyone who builds on secrets, he said, almost gently. And we all do. He looked around the small room, the table covered in papers, the old cassette player in the center. Is this what closure looks like to you? A scrapbook of ghosts? No, I said. It looks like an indictment. He laughed softly. You're going to give this to the papers? The state? You think the machine that buried your father doesn't know how to bury you? I think the tide's higher than you planned, I said. And you can't bribe the ocean. He stepped closer, voice almost a whisper. Be careful, Daniel. You've woken something that doesn't sleep. I met his gaze. Neither do I. Eli moved between us then, calm and certain. You should go, he said to Victor, before you find out how stubborn decency looks up close. Victor looked at him, then at me, something unreadable flickering in his eyes, respect or regret or calculation. You've both inherited the wrong kind of faith, he said. It will cost you. He left. The door clicked shut. For a long time we listened to the silence he left behind. Outside, sirens began to wail, not urgent, but moving this way. They're early, Eli said. No, I said, picking up my father's tape and sliding it into the recorder. They're right on time. The tape hissed, and my father's voice filled the room again, calm and steady. When you're strong enough to want the rest, go to box 17. I looked at Eli. He meant all of this. Eli nodded. He meant you. Outside, blue lights flashed across the harbor. Inside, I stacked the papers into a single folder and wrote on the cover with one of the pencils from the Marlin mug. The Read file. I was ready to hand it over. But somewhere inside, a different voice whispered that I wasn't done yet. Not until the man who'd called himself Victor told the truth himself. Tomorrow, I would make him. The police station smelled like wet paper and burnt coffee. Detective Alvarez sat across from me, elbows on a desk buried in printouts and photos. She was younger than I expected, eyes too sharp to be fooled twice. We've reviewed your materials, she said. It's a good start, but Victor Hale's people already sent lawyers. They're painting your father as unstable. He wasn't unstable, I said. He was decent. That's rarer. She gave a small, dry smile. Decency's not admissible in court. Evidence is. You have the ledger, the tapes, and the footage. That's something. Her phone buzzed. She listened, nodded once, then looked up at me. They've brought him in.
Through the glass wall, I watched Victor enter the next room. Even cuffed, he carried himself like the floor was lucky to hold him. 2 agents sat opposite. A red light on the recorder blinked steady as a pulse. I couldn't hear his words, but I knew the rhythm. Denial, disdain, delay. Alvarez motioned me closer to the window.
He claims the payments to the bank were for tax storage. Says your father fabricated allegations out of paranoia. Classic damage control. I leaned in. Play him the hospital tape, I said. She nodded to the tech. Static. Then the sound of rain and Victor's voice, young, confident, talking about policy coverage. Watching his own expression shift when the recording echoed back at him was almost worth the years it had taken. His jaw tightened. He turned toward the glass like he could see me there. Alvarez stepped into the room. "Mr. Hale," she said evenly, "you're on a state recording admitting to manipulating medical procedure during an active Coast Guard investigation. That's obstruction." Victor laughed softly. "That's nostalgia," he said. "Half the people in this building were in diapers when that tape was made. You think anyone still cares?" "Maybe not them," I said, opening the door. "But I do." He blinked just once. "Ah, the prodigal son." "Funny," I said. "My father called you something else." The room went still. Alvarez didn't stop me. "You used Harborspan to launder shipments, then used the storm to erase witnesses," I said. "He found your manifests. He tried to stop you. You couldn't kill him clean, so you drowned the story instead." Victor's eyes flicked toward the mirror, the ceiling, the door, anywhere but mine. "Do you have any idea what he was meddling with? What he could have brought down?" "Yes," I said. "You." He smiled, faint and dangerous. "You think I ran that pier? You think a man like me makes storms?" Alvarez leaned in. "Then give us the one who does." He laughed again, but there was no amusement this time, just exhaustion. "You don't get it," he said. "Harborspan was a name. The rest were faces you'll never find. And your father, he was supposed to live. We just needed him quiet. He went back for the boy. That wasn't part of the plan." My throat closed. "You left him there." "He left himself," Victor said quietly. "Some men can't help trying to save what's already gone." The silence that followed was the kind that changes air pressure. Alvarez ended the session. As they led him out, he looked back once and said, "Tell Eli I'm sorry." I didn't answer. Outside, dusk had already swallowed the harbor. I walked down to the pier where it all began, the wind cutting cold through my coat. Eli waited by the rail, cigarette glowing in the dark. "He confessed?" he asked. "Halfway," I said. "He gave us ghosts instead of names." "That's all men like him have," Eli said. "Ghosts and paperwork." I handed him the kite spool. "He mentioned you." Eli smiled faintly, the kind that hurts to hold. "Then I guess he remembered what mattered." I looked at the water. "They'll make it official now. Your record. My father's death. The company's collapse." Eli flicked ash into the dark. "And then what?" "Then I stop calling him the man who disappeared," I said, "and start calling him by his name." Somewhere out beyond the breakwater, lightning split the horizon. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, my father's voice wasn't a recording, it was memory. "Breathe slow. Don't fight the cold." The wind carried salt and silence. Eli stepped back, gave me the space men give each other when grief becomes private. I stood there until the storm finally broke. 6 months later, Mariner's Bluff smelled like paint and spring. The harbor span warehouse was gone, nothing left but leveled ground and a sign from the city promising redevelopment. People called it progress. I called it silence with better lighting. Victor took a plea deal, 20 years for obstruction, fraud, and conspiracy. The newspapers called it a landmark case for corporate accountability. I called it a receipt. During sentencing, he looked at me once, searching for something in my face. Pity, maybe. But all I had left for him was accuracy. Eli testified. His voice didn't shake once. When the judge asked if he wanted to add anything, he said, "I'm alive because Jonathan Reed believed one kid's life was worth more than his own. I'm here to prove he was right." Then he sat down, and we both exhaled the same 20 years. After the trial, I went back to the pier. The plaque had been polished by someone. I guessed Aunt June, though she never admitted it. I added one more line beneath the engraved words with a steel stylus. He didn't leave. He came home another way. The sea was quiet that day, the kind of calm that comes only after everything breaks. I held the old wooden spool, tied the last bit of the red kite tail to it, and let the wind take it. The string hummed between my fingers until it snapped, and the kite disappeared into the light like it was going somewhere specific. I kept the rest simple, sold my apartment in Seattle, moved into 2D, fixed the leaky window, repainted the walls. The place stayed small but honest. I started teaching part-time at the community college, structural design, physics, patience. Eli runs a youth workshop downstairs, teaches kids how to build boats that can survive storms. Sometimes I hear him telling them, "Measure twice, trust once." It sounds like prayer. Aunt June sends postcards from wherever she's decided to retire that month. The Gazette still drops by for quotes whenever they run out of real stories. And every year, on December 3rd, I walk to the water at dawn, bring 2 coffees, and leave one by the rail. The last letter from my father stays folded in my wallet, creased from every time I've needed to remind myself that decency isn't weakness. The tape, the photos, the ledgers, they all sit in a safety deposit box under my name now. Box 17, paid for in advance. Sometimes when the fog rolls in, I swear I hear him. The scrape of boots on wet wood. That easy laugh. The words he never got to finish on that last recording. I tell him the bridge held, the stories built, the boys safe, and in that quiet space between wind and tide, it almost feels like he hears me too.